It made me blush again. Alexander shrugged. Yes, I suppose, but you would recognize them as foreign. I can't make you think something. Relieved, I nodded. So it was you that filled my head with nice things every night before I fell asleep? And countless other moments like that? A smile tugged at his lips as he nodded. Very good. I hadn't realized you had noticed all that. He seemed a little proud of that fact even. I swear though, Grandma Croy, that I haven't intentionally read your mind again after we made that deal. Anything I'd picked up since then was because you were sending so strongly. He opened his arms and I gladly crawled into them, rejoicing in his warmth. Sending strongly? Yes. For example, last night you angled a thought directly at me. You're going to pay for that hickey, Mr. Clinton. Oh, and the deal is off. I could hear the smile in his voice as he said it. That was very funny, a run. I fell out of bed laughing. I shivered as he quoted the exact sentence I had thought last night, sending it to him because I felt like he'd spied on me with the lullaby. You really fell out of bed, Alexander? I frowned. I thought I'd imagined that happening. And did Bob barge in to check if you were all right? Alexander chuckled, and that sent a pleasant vibration through my body. Yes, a gramo quoi. That is exactly what happened. You planted that image in my head then, because I remember it, I told him. I felt him shake, although I couldn't see his face seated like this. No, Britt, that was all your own doing. I twisted around so I could see his face. Are you saying I'm telepathic too or something? He was frowning and tugged me into his lap. It made my heartbeat race. No, I don't think you are. We are just very connected. Why? Why, what a gram quai. He focused his stormy gray eyes on mine. Why do you think we're connected? I asked, even as my heart screamed at me that it was true. That connection, even now, told me that Alexander wasn't as nervous as before. My easy acceptance of the whole telepathy thing, it had eased his mind. Do you believe in love at first sight, Brittany? He asked instead of answering my question. I breathed in sharply. Was it a coincidence that he echoed Sarah now, or at least my very own thoughts when Sarah told me about her feelings for Dennis? I knew that when she explained her feelings, I had thought that before Alexander, I wouldn't have believed it. I felt my cheeks heating up as I blushed, but I nodded at him. Yes, I believe in it. The muscles in his arms were tense as he wrapped them around me. So do I. I also believe in soulmates. Have you heard of that principle? Twisting further in his lap, I made sure I was facing him by wrapping my arms around his neck, my fingers automatically entangling in his silky hair. I have heard of it. For a moment, Alexander closed his beautiful eyes, breathing in deeply as if he enjoyed the feel of my hands in his hair. My heart was beating wildly in my chest now, nervous about what he was going to say next. Brittany? He trailed off, and for the first time ever, I realized that he was unsure of himself, as if he was afraid that his next words would scare me off. You think we are soulmates? I asked him, wanting desperately to ease his mind. I couldn't stand to see him, unsure. It wasn't right. He gasped at my bold words, his eyes flying open to meet mine. Yes, I believe that. Smiling at him, I leaned in and softly brushed my lips across his in a feather-light kiss. So do I, because the word soulmate rang like a chime in my mind. I could only too well remember what it had felt like when I first laid eyes on him. Love at first sight definitely fit that description, but it was more, much more than that. Because I felt whole around him, complete, and despite our differences, I also felt safe and accepted, and he always made me feel at ease. So at ease that I found myself telling him things I usually didn't share. The need to share with him was very strong too, and the need to actually be with him even stronger. That elastic band feeling, it felt like being away from him literally put a strain on my body, and it was so hard to be around him when I couldn't actually touch him. Not to mention that mental connection we obviously shared. Alexander kissed me again, fiercer than my kiss had been, but gentle nonetheless. It wasn't like any of the kisses we'd shared before, except maybe the first one. You believe me? You don't think I'm a creep? A freak? He asked a little breathlessly, pushing me down on my back on the blanket, hovering over me, leaning his weight on his arms on either side of me. Alexander? Of course not. I wouldn't think you're a creep. I feel the same. I pulled his face down to mine for another kiss. Good, he said as we came up for air, because I love you and I'm not letting you go. His arrogance restored now, obviously. Despite the fact that I knew what the whole soulmate principle implied, I still shivered in delight at hearing him say that he loved me. It made me glow on the inside and wishing to share that feeling with him. I reached out, not with my body, but with my mind. I love you too, Alexander, he moaned. So maybe you are telepathic a grand shui. You're too good at it already. I felt him touch my mind with his, and he reflected what he felt back, just like I had done. The fierce drive to protect me was shocking and made my heart swell, followed by so much tenderness and love. He was glowing too from the inside out. Desire had flared up in him now, and he attached his lips to mine again, kissing me so passio-Alexly that my toes curled in my shoes. He held himself in check though this time, his gray eyes boring into mine as we parted for air, his hands still on either side of me holding onto the blanket we were lying on. Britt, he started, but feeling confident I shushed him. Alexander, will you tell me what a gror mocroi means now? I asked him. He frowned at my interruption, but then said, Gra mocroi means my heart's beloved. I call you that because it is what you are, I smiled. That is really sweet. The thought that he'd basically been saying he loved me all this time was really amazing. Blushing, I kissed him again. Do I need to have an endearment to call you all the time too? He chuckled. No, I rather like it when you call me Alexander. No one these days uses my full name anymore. I pushed him over so he was on his back and straddled him. I had only been able to push him over because he had allowed me to. I knew that if he wanted to remain on top, he'd have no problem staying there. He raised a single eyebrow and looked up at me with an amused expression on his face, although I could feel that the action had aroused him. I was sitting right on top of the evidence. My skirt flared out around my hips so that it draped over his chest and down his legs. Was there something else you wanted to tell me? I asked him, remembering how I had interrupted him and that we had sort of gotten sidetracked on the whole soulmate thing. It wasn't what he originally wanted to tell me. He stared at me for a moment, his hands coming up to grab my hips, one of them sliding further upwards across my bare back before pulling me down, so that I was lying on his chest and he could wrap his arms around me, my head tucked into the crook of his neck. I think you've had enough information to process for one night, don't you? I heard rustling, and then a second blanket was pulled over the both of us, protecting me from the cold of the night. There's more? I asked him, my lips moving against the skin of his throat as I spoke. I couldn't help but smile in satisfaction at the goosebumps that appeared. Yes, I'm afraid there is, but it can wait, he said honestly, and I liked how his chest moved underneath me as he spoke. Can you at least explain to me why you claim you don't need to eat? I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I didn't want to fall asleep just yet. It was quiet for a while, and then he said softly, I don't claim I don't need to eat. I just require a different kind of sustenance. Oh, like what? I asked curiously, moving my arms to slip them into his jacket. He was so nice and warm. I thought he wasn't going to reply because he was quiet for a long time. I even thought for a short moment that he'd fallen asleep, but as I gently touched my mind to his, I could feel he was still awake. It was so easy now to reach out with my mind and touch him. Almost second nature. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, lifting me a little in the air and slowly lowering me as he exhaled and his chest expanded. And blood. It's blood I need, he said then, his voice so soft and husky that I barely heard him. My mind already so foggy with sleep that I thought I misunderstood. Blood? Like a vampire? I asked him, even though the question sounded silly in my head, my soft whisper made it sound absolutely serious. Alexander didn't laugh as I said it, though. I had expected him to do that, but he didn't. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, he let me drift off to sleep. Just before I was gone, I heard him whisper, Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire. I woke up feeling rather hazy and warm. There was a scent in my nostrils that I wished I could wake up to every morning. It smelled like Alexander. Stretching, I turned around and curled up again, quickly drifting off for another hour or so, until at last the room had gotten too light for my senses to ignore it. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was that the bed was empty. I was alone. The second thing I noticed was that I was most definitely in Alexander's room, and I was wearing a shirt of his instead of PJs. The shirt was large enough to be a dress or nightgown, though. My eyes searched for a clock and finally landed on the analog, old-fashioned alarm on his nightstand. It read 10 a.m. Fuck. I sat up straight and scrambled out of bed. I was missing school. Shit. Why didn't he wake me up? Where was he anyway? Don't tell me he went to school and left me here. Searching around the room, I couldn't find my own clothes anywhere, so I slipped on the way to a large pair of sweats that were his. They had been folded over a chair in the corner. I was about to open the door to search for my clothes or overnight bag when the memories of last night crashed into me. There was a lot of white noise as my mind scrambled around all the impossible things it wanted to forget. Soulmates. The words tumbled off my lips and I had to sit down again on the edge of the bed. Alexander believed we were soulmates, and I told him I believed so too. I realized I still believed that. I was already missing him terribly. Then there was this whole thing about telepathy, and a connection that Alexander and I apparently shared that allowed us to touch each other's minds and share thoughts. I wouldn't have believed that if I didn't remember clearly doing that and experiencing that myself these past few days. Just to prove it was true, I focused my thoughts on Alexander and called out in my head, "Alexander, are you at school? Why didn't you wake me?" I didn't feel or hear anything, and I was almost starting to think it hadn't worked, and I was making a fool of myself. But then I felt it, a soft caress across my mind and Alexander's voice sounding amused. I tried a, "Gremokoi, you were sleeping very deeply. Enjoy your day off, I called you in sick. Danis is around the house somewhere if you want company." I had the vague sense of a classroom I was looking out over, and then that image was gone. Okay, that was pretty cool. I hadn't imagined that. If only he could have told me where my bag with clothes was. I was just about to leave the room again to find either my clothes or Danis when I remembered the last words he'd said to me before I'd fallen asleep. Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire. With my hand on the doorknob, I stared at the dark wood. Had that been my sleep supplying those words? Or had Alexander really told me last night that he was, in fact, a vampire? I angled the thought at him immediately, and the answer was instant. His sending no more than a single word, yes. On wobbly legs, I turned back around and crawled into his bed. Maybe I should just go back to sleep. It seemed my mind wasn't functioning properly after all. When I woke up for the third time that day, it was because my stomach was growling angrily. The scent of fresh apple pie and cinnamon hung in the air, and without thinking, I scrambled out the door and down the stairs. Following my nose, I ended up in the kitchen, where indeed, Danis was cooking up all kinds of delicious things. His back was turned to me, but he started piling food on a plate for me even before I'd said hello. "There you go, Sleeping Beauty," he said as he handed me the food. "So, how are you feeling?" I dug in, while I thought about that. Entry, and Wise and Canes, placed of cots. I wanted to go Hage as possible, so that I could check on Britt. I was worried because she had taken the whole "I'm a vampire" thing rather well. She felt so serene and calm that it seemed almost unnatural. The last time I told someone what I was, well, that person hadn't taken it so stoically, and I couldn't believe that Britt showed so little emotion over the whole thing. She must be in some sort of shock, and I wanted to be there to make sure she was all right when the truth sank in. Although, the mental link, she picked that up so fast. She'd even managed to contact me twice already today, and once 2 nights ago. During third period, I constantly looked at the empty seat she usually sat in. Sarah was sitting in her usual seat next to it with the biggest grin ever on her face. She was completely hyper over the fact that Britt now knew what we were, although I'd only said I was a vampire. Jennifer sat in the front, as was usual, and instead of her constant flirting, she stared at me with this intense, focused look. It gave me the chills. That look told me she was trying very hard to figure something out. Something about me, before I'd met Britt. I would have gotten Bob and Sarah and moved to a new location to prevent people from finding out what we were. Now, I wasn't worried about Jennifer figuring out what I was, but what I was to Britt and she to me. No matter how often Britt assured me that she got along all right with Jennifer and that she didn't need help. I knew Jennifer was out to get her, out to get my mate, and I couldn't let that happen. When class finished, I found myself alone with Jennifer. "Hello, Mr. Clinton," she said, her normally sultry voice gone to make place for an all-business one. "Hello, Jennifer," I replied, fixing a stern look on my features. "Is there something you wanted to ask? Anything you didn't get during class?" It was hard to sound polite since my voice wanted very badly to snarl, and the monster within me wanted to smack the girl silly for having hurt my mate. She smiled, and suddenly the air around us filled with that pheromone scent that came from her more siren qualities. That had to have been a deliberate act. I was suddenly doubting my assertion that she knew nothing of that heritage. "I want to make you a deal, Mr. Clinton. Or can I call you Alexander as well?" she said. The sound of my name coming from her lips was wrong, especially after I'd told Britt last night how she was the only one who called me that nowadays. "It's Mr. Clinton, Jennifer. I might be young for a teacher, but that doesn't mean you get to call me by my first name." My tone was barely civilized now. She smirked then, and I wondered if that was because of the outright lie I'd just spoken. After all, I was easily 10 times older, as the oldest teacher on staff here. "Suit yourself. I know you allowed Brittany to call you that, though. Not in public." The words left my throat before I could stop myself, and after I'd said them, I knew there was no backing down. She's exceptionally bright. The assignments she turns in are college level. I've been helping her getting a possible scholarship and giving her extra work that is more challenging. Now, if you'd show the same potential, I might consider doing the same for you, but it seems your talents lay elsewhere. Now, if you'd excuse me? Jennifer folded her arms underneath her chest, pressing her ample bosom up so she nearly popped out of her top. "No, you're not excused, Mr. Clinton," she said the name mockingly. Clearly she didn't buy my story. I raised an eyebrow at her and upped my own mental abilities. Putting as much power as I dared with a human into the command, I said, "Leave Jennifer. Don't bother me again." Her spine stiffened, and her feet were already moving in the direction of the door. But to her credit, she was fighting the command. She didn't think I was very threatening. She thought she was the predator and I was the prey, not the other way around. It gave her the strength she needed to fight it, that plus her own slight resistance to it. I turned on my glare and opened my mouth slightly, letting her see a hint of fang. "You do not want to piss me off, Jennifer. It would not be pleasant for you. I, however, might very much enjoy snapping your neck." She stopped fighting and was nearly out the door before she managed to say with a very strained voice, "I guess that means no deal. Too bad for you. Brittany isn't going to like what will happen." The little wench was out the door before I could stop her, and as I sped after her, I saw she had a whole crowd of groupies waiting for her outside. My throat dry and thirst flaring. I watched her sashay away. I could tell she was scared of me now, but not scared enough to keep her hands off Britt. I had to fight down the urge to contact Britt and tell her and Dennis to get her stuff from home so she could permanently move into my house. Knowing Brittany, she wouldn't take that very well. She'd never leave her brother behind. I understood that. I'd never leave Sarah or Bob if I didn't know they were safe. "Sarah, keep an eye on Jennifer. She's up to something." I sent the thought to my sister, but it wasn't half as easy as sending thoughts to Britt was. Even though I'd been doing this for centuries, I vented my anger by setting fire to a stack of papers I was going to throw out. It wasn't very satisfying, but the power inside me rolled when I tapped into it. It felt good, like stretching your muscles after sitting still for a long time. When at long last, the last students had left and I had no more classes to teach, I all but ran to my car. It felt agonizingly slow to move that way. I wished it was dark already and I could run home instead of drive. It would be nice to move at vampiric speed and stretch my body. Sarah and Bob were both waiting, and they got in without a word, sensing my need for speed. Although Sarah seemed to be in just as much of a hurry as I was, she kept saying how much she had to tell Britt now that she knew. Every time I tried to tell her I hadn't told Britt about her being a vampire too, she'd shush me and launch into another topic. Finally, I gave up. I'm sure Britt had figured it out herself, or else probably Dennis had told her by now. When we reached the house, I could feel Britt's emotions much clearer, and I knew she was in the kitchen talking to Dennis and tasting food. She was completely relaxed and anxious for me to get home. I drew in a relieved breath and followed Sarah inside at a more reasonable pace. "Brittany," Sarah chirped happily as she bounded into the kitchen and enveloped my mate into a nearly bone-crushing hug. "I'm so glad you know now. I have so much to tell you." The words rushed out of Sarah's mouth at surprising speed, and I wondered if Britt even got half of it. Sarah's enthusiasm made me realize how badly she'd missed a female friend these past centuries. It was obvious now, and I felt sorry that I had not noticed it. If I'd known, I would have chosen locations to live at with more vampires. Despite my distaste for most of the female vampires, I did not appreciate the fact that women always seemed to go after the strongest, most powerful, and commanding men. Sarah was still spewing words at Britt, telling her about how lonely she'd been without someone to share things with, and that she hated lying. Brittany was staring with open-mouthed surprise at my sister, and when Sarah noticed, she abruptly shut up. Britt looked at me for a moment and then turned to Sarah. "You're a vampire too?" Yes. You only told her about yourself, didn't you?" Sarah turned to me to glare, and I smiled as I crossed my arms in front of my chest and leaned against the door jamb. "I've been trying to tell you that the entire ride home, dear Fear Oj," I told her with a smirk. Behind Sarah, Britt giggled at my sister's expression, and I opened my arms, signaling that I wanted a hug. My heart literally jumped when she didn't hesitate in hurrying over. Tension I hadn't known was there drained away as soon as I wrapped my arms around her small frame, her delicious scent wrapping itself around my head. "Much better." I sent her the thought and sighed when I felt the same emotions reflected inside her. She'd missed me, and she really didn't care about what I was. "I have so many questions," Britt said, and she shyly looked up at me and then at Sarah. "Bob's a vampire too, then, right? Are you even really siblings?" Sarah giggled, her good humor restored as she nodded. "Yeah, he is, and yeah, we are. Let's sit down in the living. I made cake to celebrate," proposed Dennis as he picked up a very pretty-looking cake and raised it to show us. "Celebrate what?" Wondered. "Entries about needies. I learned in Boz. The following community now know to welcome her into the supernatural community," said Sarah. She'd obviously read his mind, and Dennis beamed at her as she danced over to him, grabbed his hand, and led him out into the living. I thought it was really sweet that Dennis wanted to welcome me with cake, but it seemed a bit like a waste if he and I would be the only ones to eat it. Alexander unwrapped his arms from around me and tugged me with him into the living. There, he gracefully sat down on one of the couches. Bob was already seated in one of the big chairs, and Dennis and Sarah sat snuggled on the love seat. 2 plates set with cake. I took one and then sat down next to Alexander. He didn't hesitate to wrap his arm around my shoulders and pulled me sideways into him. His breath filtering across the back of my neck, it made goosebumps rise on my arms. To hide my blush, I took a bite of the cake and then nearly moaned at the taste explosion in my mouth. Seriously? Dennis should be chef in his own restaurant or something. It was just that good. Alexander chuckled. "She likes it, Dennis. Maybe I should offer you a job. I think Bellavine could use another cook." Dennis laughed. "Cool. Now, what questions did you have, gramo choi?" Alexander asked as I put the empty plate on the salon table. He surprised me by pulling my legs across his lap and wrapping his arms around me so tightly that I was practically sitting in it. "I missed you, Britt, and in a little while you have to go home," he offered as an explanation. The thought gentle and filled with a sense of longing that I couldn't entirely place. Was it because he'd missed me and longed for me then, or did he long for something even now? I sorted my mind so I could ask the questions that had been ghosting through my head all day. Talking with Dennis hadn't helped. He'd raised more questions than answered. I understood he really was a witch now, and that his grandmother was apparently called the Crone, which meant she was the oldest and leader of the witches in this community. But about vampires, he hadn't known all that much, and he certainly hadn't been willing to discuss them. He said I should ask Alexander every time I asked something mostly. Okay, do you really drink blood, and how often do you have to?" I asked. I was a little worried about that. It wouldn't do if my boyfriend was a murderer, although I didn't think they had to kill when they took blood. "We really drink blood, Britt. It depends on the vampire how often they need to feed and how well they are able to control themselves," Alexander said with a gentle smile. "I go about 2 to 3 weeks in between feeds," said Sarah. "But I knew a vamp once who fed only once every 6 months. He was really old though. How often do you feed?" I asked Alexander. 2 weeks, but lately a little more often again. By the way, Bob, that was good advice. It does make things more bearable." "It made what more bearable?" Bob nodded and then spoke, for the first time ever since I met him with full articulation. "I knew it would, Alex. Before you ask Brittany, I feed once a week, often even twice. For me, it is much harder to control my fangs when I'm not full." As he said it, I realized I could see his fangs. As he moved his lips, I would catch glimpses of the elongated teeth. They come out whenever I'm around humans, Bob said, flashing me a rather wry smile. I understood why he never talked much now, and why if he did, he always mumbled. It was to hide his fangs. Okay, how about daylight? None of you seem affected. So, that's a myth? And garlic and steaks and crosses? They all laughed, including Dennis. None of that works. Depending on the age of a vampire, stakes work sometimes, through the heart or the head. They're me. They'd have to remove my brain to actually kill me, for all of us here, I think, Alexander explained. Oh, why the brain and not the heart? That was completely new. I hadn't heard of that before. If you take out my heart, or at least stake it, it would regenerate eventually. It's only a muscle, and we don't actually need it to pump blood through our system. Our brain, it still seats the center of control. Remove that completely and it wouldn't regenerate and thus kill us, Alexander said as he ran his hands over my back, tracing patterns. But a young vampire would die if you staked his heart. Wondered. Yeah, the longer we live, the more our very cells become infused with the immortality. The rate at which this goes is different for everyone. So the older you are, the more physical trauma you can regenerate from. A few decades isn't enough to keep you alive if you fall from the 20th floor or something, or get run over by a truck. A few centuries probably is. Oh, and how do you become a vampire? Do you really exchange blood or something? That would be interesting to know, because maybe one day I'd have to become one. I couldn't keep growing older each day and eventually die while Alexander lived on forever young. You actually do, yes. But it's taxing on the maker, so it doesn't happen very often. It's very dangerous for the maker to make more than one person into a vampire in a short period of time. We don't know why exactly, because the blood exchanged isn't enough to even drain you a little. Sarah was the one to tell me this, and for some reason, she looked at Bob as she did. Okay, so vampires don't lightly make that decision. How come you three were all turned then? I asked. It seems strange that 3 siblings would all be made. Or did they all have different makers? I was turned first, said Bob, and then I turned Sarah and Alexander myself. I gasped at this new information. Was that why Bob had more trouble with control? Because he'd turned 2 people? Alexander nodded, following my train of thought. We think that has to do with it, yes. It is possible he gave so much of his strength and power to us when he turned us, that it left him none for himself. Ooh, powers? I had to ask about that later. We lived in a small village in Ireland, a place that no longer exists. Bob was 18 when he ran away from home, Alexander started. Sarah clapped her hands. Yes, Alex, tell her the whole story. I love it when you tell stories. Alexander nodded and cast Bob a searching look, as if to ask if that was okay. Because it was obvious this was largely Bob's story. I didn't see Bob nod, but something was communicated between the 2 males. We come from a large family, such as almost all families were during that time. Our mother bore 13 children, of which 4 died before their 10th birthday. Sarah was the youngest, and Bob nearly the oldest. 1 sister and brother born before him. Both already married and living in their own houses. A beautiful woman had appeared in town. She was what many women called a temptress, succubus, a woman that would lure innocent men and eat them. They weren't completely wrong. The woman was a vampire. But although she ate them, she didn't kill her victims. Deidre. Her name was Deidre. It means tears, Bob said. Emotion reflected in his voice that I couldn't quite place. It was clear this woman had meant a lot to him, though. Alexander nodded, and as he continued, his voice sounded more Irish with every word he spoke. Bob was drawn to Deidre, and one day he declared to our parents that he wished to marry her. Father refused and said she was evil, wrong. Bob ran away, and we didn't see him again for 10 years. Wow. Bob was seriously a lot older then? Alexander? I was 15 when he disappeared and 25 when I saw him again. That was the night he turned me. The entire village had been struck by disease, and after that famine. The disease killed many people during the first wave, among them a lot of our siblings and father. Alexander hesitated a short moment then, before saying, I was married and had my own house, next to the smithy where I'd been apprenticed for a very long time before taking over. The smith had no sons left alive. The second wave of disease killed both my children, one of them barely more, then an infant. It drove my wife mad with grief, and she killed herself while I was out to visit Sarah, my only sibling left alive in town. I felt shocked. Alexander had been married and had 2 children, and he'd lost it all to a stupid disease? A disease that nearly killed his entire family? I was weak and sick from hunger. Everyone was like that, but some were sicker than others. I wasn't so sick that I would have died, but Sarah was. The very day my wife died would have been the last for her too if Bob hadn't showed up. I was mad at him at first, but mostly I was shocked. He hadn't aged a single day since last I'd seen him. Bob looked grief-stricken as he told me he'd only just heard the news about all the deaths in town. He said he'd come as fast as possible. Then he offered us the miracle cure for Sarah, the thing that had kept him young. There. Alexander stopped and looked at Bob again. Alexander didn't trust me. He couldn't believe I had something to offer that would save Sarah. I looked like a vagabond and couldn't blame him. My clothes torn and dirty, blood caked on the sleeves and around the neckline of my shirt. He wanted me to cure him first so that he knew it worked. I told him it would kill him, but that he'd wake up again all better. I was desperate though. I needed him to agree and let me save Sarah. I couldn't allow my entire family to die. So I attacked him and nearly drained him before he could say any more, then fed him my blood. While Alexander was out and undergoing the change, I did the same to Sarah. I knew she didn't have much time left. Not enough to wait for Alexander to gain consciousness again. The second time was much harder, and it left me so weak that for a while I thought I would be the one to die. Alexander picked up the story again. When I woke up, my senses were much better and I was filled with a thirst I couldn't understand. I found a pale and unconscious Bob on the floor next to Sarah, but Sarah looked so much better than before. The vampirism had already healed the sores, and she no longer looked emaciated, and she looked beautiful again. Like I remembered her, she was pale though, and she felt cold. For a moment I thought she was dead because she wasn't breathing, but then she opened her eyes. Sarah interrupted, "We don't have to breath, just like we don't have a heartbeat. But we go through the motion of breathing, so not to scare you humans." Alexander nodded. After that, Bob explained what we were, and ever since we've been roaming around in the world, living in places for a few years at a time, and returning to some places we like every other generation. We were all quiet for a moment while I absorbed all this information. Then suddenly, Dana said, "I'm glad you saved her, Bob, thank you." Only then did I realize that this was new for him too, and that he'd been just as enraptured as I had been. Alexander shifted his legs and then tightened his arms around me. "It is time for you to go home, Agramo Kroyi. I will drive you." I groaned before I could stop myself. I didn't want to go home at all. Although for Andy's sake, I knew I would anyway. It would just be very hard to be without Alexander. Yet again, it felt like I'd barely been with him all day. Maybe it's better if I drive? "Can't take the risk of Jennifer seeing you, Alex," Sarah said. And I knew she was right, and so did Alexander. But we both groaned and shook our head at the same time.